direct response to evolving threats, complex operational environments, and are imperative to respond to the scourge of terrorism. By sharing our experience, India offers not only a military account but also operational insights and humanitarian lessons that are deeply relevant to shaping future peacekeeping doctrine. The challenges we encountered, the strategies we developed, and the outcomes achieved can contribute to refining our collective approach to security, resilience, and the protection of vulnerable communities. Today, as we turn our attention to Operation Sindoor, I urge you to look beyond tactical narratives and to consider how the lessons from this recent chapter in India's fight against terror can strengthen our joint capabilities and enhance the effectiveness of UN peacekeeping missions worldwide. In my interaction with some of my Foreign Service attaché friends last night during the ice-breaking dinner, I was also urged by some of them to speak about this, and that's why, while the conclave remains very much about peacekeeping, we did think it important and imperative to give everybody an insight into events that you're already well familiar with, but we thought we'll just highlight a few things. On the screen, ladies and gentlemen, is shown my mandate, and that is why I'm here to speak to you today. Okay, now, we thought we'll put into perspective a little historical context. If you look at this graph, ladies and gentlemen, and it's in the late 80s that this problem started in Jammu and Kashmir. And as you can see, since then we've had more than 28,000 terror incidents. Since the 90s, we've had more than 100,000 people from the minorities that have been compelled to move out of Jammu and Kashmir, a migration of more than 60,000 families, and also 15,000 innocent civilians, and more than 3,000 security personnel have been killed. And it's very clear as to where this is coming from. Now, why I also chose to flash in front of you the historical context is that it is not as if Operation Sindoor happened overnight. If you take your mind back to the attack on our parliament back in 2001, we'd then been compelled to carry out some kind of a mobilization on our borders. We remained there for the better part of almost a year. Yet, at that point in time, wiser sense prevailed and we didn't take matters forward. If you take your mind back to 2016, where some of our security personnel were barbarically ambushed, some of their tents set on fire, we then resorted to an action which was yet in the vicinity of the line of control. Go take your mind back to 2019, we carried out a precision strike across the line of control and then restricted it to that. But this time, it was the intensity and the magnitude of the events that took place that we were compelled into the kind of action that you are now well familiar with. So what happened in Pahalgam? And where is Pahalgam? You see the little star on the map. It is, of course, a tourist attraction, one of the most beautiful places that you can visit. And having commanded, the 15 Corps in Kashmir myself, I can testify to that it'll probably be, if some of you have seen it, for others that haven't, amongst the most beautiful places that you can go to. Approximately 7,000 feet above mean sea level and replete with exquisite meadows and valleys. 30 million tourists, ladies and gentlemen, thronged Jammu and Kashmir last year, and many of these would have had Pahalgam on their itinerary. And yet, on the 22nd of April, terror came calling. And how? Sponsored terrorists from across the line of control killed 26 innocent tourists, singled them out, identified them, asked for the community that they came from, and shot them in cold blood in front of their families and loved ones. There were immediate claimers. This was glory, but yet when the Kashmir Resistance Front that claimed the attack initially realized that possibly matters had gone beyond their control, immediately later withdrew. And that, of course, follows a pattern. It set into motion a process. Everybody knew that a response was inevitable. But we took our time, ladies and gentlemen. The Chief of Army Staff has probably alluded to this in some of his exchanges with the media, that there was complete flexibility for the armed forces to carry out and prosecute the actions that followed. So between the 22nd of April and the night of the 6th and 7th of May, the actions that you see on your screen were evolving and unfolding. So we were appreciating enemy courses of action. We were prioritizing our targets. And I'll just speak in a moment about that. We carried out certain precautionary deployment on our borders to make sure that the enemy was deterred. And of course, there was a lot of inter-service government departments and agencies that were coordinating amongst themselves. The final selection of targets was carried out from a large number of targets that we kind of scrutinized. And of course, while all this was happening, there was a very harmonized and proactive information warfare campaign that was also unfolding. So when I speak about the targets, you can see 9 dots on the map in front of you. The ones in red are the ones that were engaged finally in the early hours of 7th of May by the Indian Army with its vectors, and the 2 in blue were engaged by the Indian Air Force. That is not to say that the Indian Navy was not involved in this process. Some of the vectors that were utilized, also some of the personnel that were manning those vectors, came from the Indian Navy. They were very much part of the rehearsals and the coordination that was happening before these strikes were actually carried out. So it's very safe and very correct to say that it was very much a tri-service operation. And the strikes were precise to make sure that there was no collateral damage. So you're already familiar with these, but I've just, the purple line that you see on the map is the line of control. So if you correlate the targets to that, it will tell you as to where exactly these are located. So out of the 9, 5 were located in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And this is the first of those. As you can see the effects before and after, and some high value targets that were eliminated. This is Kotli. This is opposite the Rajouri Menda sector of Jammu and Kashmir, for those of you who are familiar. The videos all of you have seen, ladies and gentlemen. Again, near Kotli. And all of these targets were engaged by the Indian Army. And the vectors that we used were, of course, precision munitions, loiter munitions, and all part of the inventory of the Indian Army. Some weapons were indigenous, and some, of course, that we had from earlier times were ex-import. This is Bhimber. You can see the location on the map. And if you see the video here, you can see the mortar bomb coming out of the RPV. And as we come further down, you can see now that this target is now shifted out of Punjab occupied Kashmir. And why I decided to show it to you on the map like this is because this was unprecedented. When I spoke about the historical context, ladies and gentlemen, every time we've been hit by terror, we've tried to be different. And therefore our actions have been different from those that we've carried out hitherto on previous occasions. And it was again different this time. And so we went into the heartland of Pakistan, and I think that's why we achieved the surprise that we did. We come down to Muridke, and this is of course the terror hub of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. That's the Indian Air Force strike you can see on the screen right on top. And of course the before and after pictures, some high value targets that we neutralized. All in all, I've said this earlier, in the strikes that we carried out in the early hours of 7th of May, more than 100 terrorists were neutralized. This is of course Bahawalpur. If you go back to the second star on the map, these are the Maxar images of before and after. And that is why I spoke of the precision. You can see on the right as to where the rockets and the missiles have gone through. There was, of course, after all this had happened, a very blatant flaunting of the nexus, which I would say even surprised us. That caution had been thrown to the winds, and the picture says it all. Proscribed terrorist by the United Nations, leading a prayer service for those that had been killed, and the who's who from the Pakistan Army, no less than the GOC of the 4 Corps himself, attending the funeral ceremony, apart of course from many others that were prominent and were present that day. So, if you want to carry out an analysis of what happened and why it happened, the fact that the Pakistan Army and its chief were under duress at the time that this happened is known to everybody. And therefore, there was a need for him to revive not only his image but that of the Pak Army itself. And I think the best way and the only way that is known to them was to do what they did, as cowardly as it may have been. And the inevitability of the Indian response, I think, was very much there. If you were going to carry out, this kind of an action in the manner that it was perpetrated. And of course, it doesn't take much to claim victory, especially when there hasn't been kinetic contact, and that was more a result because we were very clear as to what we were after. So we went after terrorists, and once that had been achieved, it wasn't our intention to escalate it unless compelled to do so. So there was also cross-border firing by Pakistan immediately once the terror targets were engaged. You can see the number of ceasefire violations on the top, and this carried on for a while. And at that point in time, if you recollect my media interaction, I'd said about 35 to 40 is what our estimate was. But the Pakistanis, possibly unwittingly, let out their awards list. I think last month it was on the 14th of August, and the number of posthumous awards that they awarded suggests to us now that their casualties on the line of control were also in excess of 100. We of course responded to these. You can see some of the actions that were carried out on the line of control, and we were of course prepared for this. Often in a lot of exchanges on the media that I've seen some people suggest that we were after terror targets and therefore we were not prepared for the eventualities that would follow. I think that's very naive, and it's almost churlish to suggest that a professional army such as the Indian Army would go into this kind of an action not preparing for the contingencies. We had wargamed 4 to 5 steps ahead, and we knew that the Pakistanis were going to do this. So we went and hit them on the second layer, which is not something that they expected on the line of control, and that's why they had the number of casualties that they did. Okay, so the drones came, and that was especially large numbers even after the 2 DGMOs had spoken. And I think it's only congenital and in the vein of the enemy that we have to go back on their word. And the drones came after the 2 DGMOs had spoken, and there was some kind of an understanding to cease hostilities. You saw some of those engagements, and you can see that, retaliation, rockets, drones, I think everything was a dismal failure. And I think in large part to the very strong integrated air defense that we could put up. And you can see on the left that, a variety and class of drones was utilized in an attempt to cause casualties and damage to men and material. But everything was a dismal failure. On the right, you can see one of the missiles that was utilized. So this, of course, then led us to swing the Indian Air Force into action, and in precision strikes that they carried out on the night of the 9th and 10th of May. Now we hit 11 of their air bases, and of late, I think the air chief has spoken about that. If you see, 8 air bases, 3 hangars and 4 radars were damaged. Pakistani air assets were destroyed on the ground. So we know for sure that one C-130 class of aircraft and one AEW, 4 to 5 fighter jets. And of course, there were assets that were also destroyed in air. And we now know that the world's longest ever ground-to-air kill at 300 kilometers plus, and 5, of course, high-tech fighters. I think the impunity with which these attacks were carried out is what is significant. The Indian Navy was also very much in action, ladies and gentlemen, and this is possibly a fact that is not so well known, but the Navy had sailed into the Arabian Sea, and when the DGMO spoke, they were very well poised, and had the enemy decided to take it any further, it could have been catastrophic for them, not only from the sea, but from other dimensions as well. The perpetrators of the attack at Pahalgam, and the Indian Army will chase them to the depths of hell, and we did. It took us 96 days, but we did not let them rest. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, when these 3 were found and terminated clinically, it seemed as if they were exhausted of running, and they also seemed very malnourished. So we kept them relentlessly under pressure. It also suggests to you as to how difficult counter-terrorist operations can be in a place like Jammu and Kashmir. Often people can turn around and tell you that where have they vanished? But it is sometimes like searching for a needle in a haystack. And while it may seem very simple to the non-discerning and those that are not initiated, but these things take time. Generating intelligence can take a while. But as you can see, the Home Minister has spoken about this in the Indian Parliament. They were eliminated, and justice was yet again served. There has been a doctrinal shift in our strategy against terror. Our Prime Minister has spoken about it, and these are the 3 things he said: that terror attacks are an act of war, and therefore there will be decisive retaliation. We will not succumb to nuclear blackmail, and there is no distinction between terrorists and their sponsors. So if I was to just encapsulate this whole operation, 88 hours is what it took for the enemy to come and ask for a cessation of hostilities. You're well aware of that. For that call to be made by my counterpart then. We achieved our politico-military aims. We hit 9 targets across the breadth of Pakistan. This is, of course, a maturing of India's doctrine beyond the binaries of peace and war. You will see, as you did this time, a measured compellence from us. And of course, this was a fusion of military precision, diplomatic agility, informational superiority, and economic leverage. I'm speaking about the Indus Water Treaty of 1960 being put into abeyance the moment the terror attack was perpetrated at Pahalgam. So if I was also to then put this into now those 4 domains, and you can see, I'll just request you to read through this. I've already spoken about most of this. As far as our military actions were concerned, ladies and gentlemen, they were targeted, controlled, non-escalatory, and we openly acknowledged them to maintain our credibility. We also made sure that we put into place critical and significant conventional measures to apply pressure. We carried out some significant and telling forward deployments and extended our punitive reach to hitherto unprecedented levels.